Good evening and welcome to Wednesdays with the Mayor, and welcome our crowd audience here to the Missoula Public Library on a very cold evening. Mayor Josh, Jordan is here. Josh Slotnick's over here. Jordan's here. I'll have to get my days right as we go along through the evening. All right, we're good. And we're off and running this evening on a very cold evening. As I said, we appreciate everybody coming out, and those of you watching at home or watching later on the stream, we appreciate your interest in our topic tonight of property taxes. It's one of those nights I tried to get everybody, we could move out on the terrace here at the library, but nobody wanted to do that because it's very cold. It's kind of that weather that we don't tell the tourists about, right? Yeah, exactly. We should, I think, just to be fair, yes. It was funny on Twitter today. I was tweeting about how cold it was, and one of the former mayors of Bozeman who follows me on Twitter, he said, "Did you shovel your sidewalk?" Because he's always teasing me about that in Missoula. And I said, "Well, no, the wind took care of it for me." And I thought maybe that wasn't the right answer, to Bozeman. I'm not sure. Okay, well, Jordan, let's talk about property taxes tonight. I know I was really looking forward to this topic because it's something that all of us are involved in. It affects so many things that we have to do, and historically, we've just kind of gotten to a point where we really have to look at this system. And so, walk us through a little bit of the history and why property tax reform right now.
Well, I think it's really timely for us in Missoula right now, but across the state. And that's because our property tax system in the state of Montana is fundamentally broken. It is a system that is based on an economy that no longer exists, and it is a system that is regressive and unfair, that is not sensitive to ability to pay. And so that's the context. That we've got the system that was designed decades ago. Back in the 80s, we had 4 mills that were running 3 shifts a day around the clock. We had low property values. We had not very many tourists. And today, we have significantly higher property values. Our residential property values are going through the roof. We have a ton of tourists. We're not able to capture any revenue from them. And we have this shifting economy. We have a real tech-based economy, a real service-based economy. We don't have this industrial economy that we had decades ago. And you can see that in Missoula County's largest taxpayer. A couple decades ago, it was Smurfit Stone. And now it's actually Northwestern Energy. And that is, of course, a regulated utility. So Missoulians are paying that tax on their utility bill. So it's just a different economy, and our tax system hasn't kept up.
And I know the thing is, and so we explain for people so they understand. So if you were Smurfit Stone, if you were Stimson in Bonner, if you were any of those types of operations, you would pay property taxes based upon not only, your facility, but also taxes that were tied to equipment and investment and all those operations. So that structure was very important to local government, wasn't it?
Exactly. And so what we've also seen over the decades is a tax shift. So back, that example back with Smurfit Stone, they had business equipment, and that was a separate type of property tax that was taxed on that large scale industrial equipment. The legislature in 1999 and 2001, again, over the last a number of times over the last couple decades, have cut the tax on business equipment, and that is an effective property tax shift to Class 4 properties, and that's our residential and small commercial properties. So back a couple decades ago, about 43% of Missoula County taxes came from residences. Now that is over 60%. So that has just been a shift of the burden. So there's a lot of things that make up the picture of how property taxes fund local government. And just one small piece of the puzzle is, what's the tax bill on my residence? But we don't control the other aspects of that formula. Those are all controlled by the state. And so that's really why I want to highlight this as a problem. We have an opportunity with the legislature in session to really raise awareness of the fact that we have this system that is fundamentally out of date.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about that too with a facility like Smurfit, for example. That was no small bill that they were paying. I mean, you're talking, I don't know the exact number, I used to know that, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars usually per year.
Absolutely.
That was directly going into Missoula County or City of Missoula, whatever those local jurisdictions were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the kind of money that would pay for those services previously or those kinds of operations, right, for the government?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about how this sort of shapes up then. And what's your level of concern? Are we at a breaking point with this or close to a breaking point? what's our pain threshold right here with trying to solve this problem?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're at a point where there's real pain. I think that we're at a point where people are really struggling to pay their property taxes. And I think that there's been actually a large number of thoughtful proposals that have been in the legislature this year. And unfortunately, there was Representative Carlin had a property tax circuit breaker bill that just failed out of the House. And unfortunately, one of the representatives, Representative Jennifer Carlson out of Manhattan, said the state did not create the property tax problem, and it's not our job to fix the property tax problem. And I think that's fundamentally out of touch with the fact that this system is baked into state law, and it is absolutely the job of the legislature to fix a problem that has been this long simmering problem. So as far as, you know, those cuts back in '99, those took a dozen or so or more sources that used to go to local government and cobbled them into what's now called the entitlement share, and that comes to local government as a package. And the problem is that those haven't kept up with the rate of the cost inflation of providing services at local government. So it's been this slow squeeze where we've been squeezed out as local government little by little every year as those tax revenues haven't kept up, and the only option is to shift the taxes to those class 4 properties. That's the residences and the small commercial. And so it is, it's this long simmering problem. And, you know, when we talk about climate, you know, if you look in the late 80s, early 90s, there were a handful of people who were aware of, they called it the greenhouse effect at the time. And then, you know, in the early 2000s, there were more people who were aware of it. Now it is commonplace knowledge that we are in a climate crisis and that we have to take urgent action to address the climate crisis. The property tax situation in Montana follows a similar trajectory, where there has been an awareness, you know, among economists, among people in local government, that there's a problem brewing. That awareness has existed for a number of years, for decades, really. There has been an awareness. The fiscal notes on those bills in '99 and 2001 are remarkable. They're staggering. They spell out in the millions, you know, in the tens of millions. This will impact local government. This will impact local schools. This will be catastrophic for these entities that rely on property taxes.
So you're referring to the debate over those bills and some of the response when that was being debated in '99.
Yeah, exactly. And now we're at a point where we are really reaping what we've sown, you know, a couple decades ago, where we have this system that, again, it's regressive, so it disproportionately impacts the lowest income people in our community, and it is unfair and it's out of date, and it's been that slow simmer for those last couple decades.
One thing I found that was interesting, not just in Missoula but elsewhere, is to watch how that concern over the property tax burden has sort of shifted over the years. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, it was very much, you'd hear from especially elderly or people on fixed incomes, and they'd say, I can't afford to live in my house anymore. What I'm hearing now in the last 2 to 3 years, especially as people who are still working, maybe you know, both members of a household are working or whatever, it's pretty much universal that there's this concern about taxes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the fundamental problems with property taxes, and one of the reasons why they're so regressive, is that they don't really have any bearing on the ability to pay. So there are people who live in the University District, well, who live throughout Missoula, but I'll pick on the University District because it's an area that's seen an increase in value.
Right.
But there are people who have had a family home in the University District for decades, and they may be cash poor. They may be sitting on $1.5 million home, or living in $1.5 million home, but they may not have the income to support that. So property taxes. Income taxes, to the contrary, have this baked-in mechanism of ability to pay. It's a percentage of what you make, so you can pay it.
Yeah,
because
it fluctuates accordingly.
You make more, you pay more, and,
Right.
and it scales in a way that is sensitive to the ability to pay. Property taxes, on the other hand, are just based on the value of the property, which may not have any bearing. You know, the example in the University District, you have the expensive house that has become expensive over time because it's been in your family. But maybe your wage hasn't kept up, or maybe you're retired and on a fixed income. And so that disconnect between ability to pay is really, I think, why people are feeling that pain point.
And I think it's especially true the last a couple of years, especially as we've seen home values fluctuate. I know people I have been around and work with, they panic because every year it's like, here comes that reassessment, and all of a sudden now, because your taxes are based into that mortgage, all of a sudden it's like it keeps going up, it keeps going up, it keeps going up. You can fight back with refinance, but that only goes so far, especially as the interest rates start going up. That mechanism's not as reliable as it was.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about especially recent changes. So we've talked about industry going away, and we've talked about the loss of those sources. But what's happened, especially during the pandemic, say the last 3 years, when we talk about that shift to work at home, when we talk about maybe a little less commercial investment, give me a snapshot of what's happened most recently here.
Well, I think what will be really interesting is what happens with this year's valuation cycle. So the state of Montana does this reappraisal cycle that's every 2 years, and this is one of those years. So we'll get new taxable values, we'll get new, essentially new values for all of the properties throughout the state this year, and I think it'll be really telling to see what's happened with our explosion of the value of property in Western Montana. And that's really, that taxable value really lags the market value, the sale price. It lags that pretty significantly. So I think we could see really large increases in taxable value when those reappraisals come out this summer.
If I'm a business owner, how is property taxing impacting me? If I say own a standalone facility, maybe a building of my own, a restaurant or something like that, how are those people being impacted by this property tax issue?
Yeah, well, the valuation increase is part of the equation. So the total property tax is it's essentially value times tax, times mills, which is kind of a tax rate, and that equals the total amount of tax coming in. And so that other part of the formula can go down if values go way up. And so that's, there's some of that is in flux. But I think the bigger issue is the tax shift. So the squeeze from, there used to be this industry, and now that there's this void where there used to be this revenue source, and so everything else has to grow to fill the void. And that's really where the squeeze comes from, is the fact that we don't have the diversity. What we need is a diversity of revenue sources. A good example of that, Commissioner Slotnick took the lead on a Missoula County measure that the city supported to add a local option tax to gasoline.
Right.
That was allowed under state law. It went to the voters in 2020. It passed by the voters, and it went into effect briefly. The legislature took that away in 2021. So that was an effort to solve this problem. It was an effort to diversify our revenue sources. So now we're back to, it didn't bring in a ton of money, but it brought in $1 million a year or so, or that's what it would have brought in if it had been allowed to go into effect. And so now that's a shift. $1 million a year is a couple percentage point of a property tax increase. So every tool that we get taken away, or every tool that we don't have the ability to explore, is a direct result of an increase in property taxes.
Now, the thing I think it's interesting too is that, of course, Montana has a natural aversion to taxes, with especially an income tax, sales tax. That's been a fighting. Those are fighting words for 40 years or more. If you don't have tools, and I'm not saying sales tax necessarily, but whatever, gas tax, whatever those local options are, right? If you don't have that, how much of a bind does that put an agency, a jurisdiction like the city in, if you don't have those kinds of things in a toolbox?
So the state of Montana, the legislature interim committee did a study on tax systems in Montana and other states. And in Montana, local governments receive 96.5% of their general fund revenues from property taxes. And
96.5.
So, I mean,
wow.
Just a staggering amount of property of dependence on property taxes. Contrast that with other states, it's 72%. So that's a big difference. I mean, that's a huge difference. If we could alleviate 20-some% of our property tax burden by shifting to other forms, by shifting to a local option tourist tax, by shifting to something, Portland has some innovative stuff that they're doing to fund an affordable housing bond. That's a local option corporate income tax on corporations making more than $5 million a year. So there's some real innovative tools that are out there in other places. And I think one of the things that I think we need to start talking about as Montanans is that local governments are closest to the people, they're closest to the problem, they're closest to finding the solution. And we need to be allowing local governments to take measures to the voters. I don't think it's this radical left-wing idea to say that a local government should be able to ask the voters if they want to do something. That's a pretty basic function of how our democracy ought to work. And to be able to go to the voters and say, I mean, this building is a great example of this building is this beautiful facility. And I think that there are people in the legislature who view paying for this building as a burden that Missoula County and the city of Missoula saddled the taxpayers with. And it fails to understand that an overwhelming majority of the voters wanted this building. This building is this beautiful asset in our downtown that is just, it's an incredible asset. It's an incredible place for exchange of ideas, for learning, for gathering, for meeting, for just for looking out at Lolo Peak. It's this wonderful facility that our community wanted. And that was the tool we had, was to go to the voters and say, do you want this beautiful building that does all these great things for our community? And they said yes. And that is direct decision making by the voters. You know, they say this service, this library, this school, this transit system, these open spaces provide value. And we're investing in the future of our community because we believe in the value that provides us. And so I guess I don't think it's a fundamentally radical idea to say that local government should be able to ask the voters if they want to do something and pay for it.
Now, I'm going to take a devil's advocate role, which I do at times, but I could also look at it from the other standpoint. If we're talking about the tax burden, okay, for a minute, you can look at it and say, okay, but Missoula has approved, a library. We a big bond issue for the school district a few years ago, the 2020 plan. We approved Fort Missoula Regional Park. We've been on a kind of a spending spree in terms of those things. If I'm in Helena and I'm concerned, or I'm hearing from other constituents who say, I can't afford my taxes anymore, they may take an opposite view of that and say, well, why should we give that power to the locals? What would you say to that argument that, if some lawmaker sitting in Helena and he's hearing from somebody else that feels opposite, like we can't afford it anymore?
Yeah. Well, I'd say connect it to ability to pay. So right now, like I said, property taxes, that's the only system. So it's this system that doesn't have very much, there's no nuance in terms of sensitivity to ability to pay. So Senator Shannon O'Brien from Missoula had a circuit breaker bill, and a property tax circuit breaker. You plug in my in-laws' house before they had some electrical work done, if the microwave was on at the same time as the dishwasher, the breaker tripped, and it's too much juice going through the circuit, and it's the same concept. You get to a point where it's not tenable for to ask someone to pay based on their income or based on other factors. And so what Senator O'Brien's bill did was take a program that exists today, and that's the elderly homeowner tax credit, and it removed the age limitation, and it expanded eligibility of that program. It was a pretty elegant solution. It failed. It was Senate Bill 15. The city of Missoula was standing in support of that. Another one was House Bill 280, sponsored by Missoula Representative Jonathan Carlin, and that bill was another property tax circuit breaker. So that one would give a credit again, based on ability to pay. So you have property that is high value, but you don't have the income to support it. You have this circuit breaker that intervenes, and that basically takes money from the income tax system to cover the deficiencies in the property tax system.
So the idea is we're not saying no property taxes, get rid of it. Mm-hmm. The reform is the idea how to make it more workable, to more match what we have today. And that's an example of that circuit breaker type concept. Yeah. Because it would put a system in place, right, that we don't have now.
Yeah. And so if I were to Former Senator Dick Barrett told me this the other day, and I thought it was a really apt analogy. If I was to go to our council president and say, you may not spend any more money on groceries in real dollars for the rest of your life, like nobody would accept that. I couldn't go to any, we couldn't say,
It's just not
you couldn't
realistic.
artificially throttle something like property taxes. And I mean, it doesn't solve the problem of the fact that we need revenue to pay for the services that our community values. And that's the problem we need to solve. I think one of the criticisms that we've seen in local government, people say local government has a spending problem. We have a revenue problem, and we have a diversity of revenue sources problem. So these property taxes are ballooning for reasons that are beyond our control, and no one has ever come to the mayor's office and said, I want you to cut the grass in the parks less often. I want it to take an extra 90 seconds for a fire truck to show up. I want you to do a little bit less as far as what how you treat the wastewater before you discharge it into the river.
Just leave it.
Yeah. Well, we don't mind having a dirt street. We don't get these requests to reduce the level of service. People value the level of service, and that's the disconnect here. So over and over and over again, through citizen surveys, through other mechanisms, we learn that people in our community value the services that they receive from local government. And then we have this goofy, decades-old system for funding them. And that's the disconnect.
I want to get to Commissioner Slotnick and Councilwoman Jones are here, but I thought of one thing kind of to wrap up this piece. So if we did that, if you had some equity system built into this, the old adage always is, well, you're just shifting the tax burden, Mm-hmm. So is there any concern in your mind that if you put some of these mechanisms in place, that it would somehow shift the burden? So now if somebody's coming in, they want to build a new conference center, right? Or they want to build a new facility. There's a private investment piece. Any fears that shifting that at all could have an impact on that type of investment in the community?
Well, I think, tax policy is complicated and it needs to be thoughtful. So the reform needs to be thoughtful. It needs to be sensitive to these, it's like a waterbed. When you push down on one area and another area goes up. So you need to, that needs to be a thoughtful consideration of how that's done. I would say unequivocally that the property tax burden needs to shift. Right now, and there's a handout that's around the room, but there's a good chart in there that shows the regressivity of property taxes. So someone earning less than $18,000 a year spends over 5% of their income on property taxes. Someone earning over $450,000 a year spends less than 2% of their income on property taxes. And this just goes down. You get to the middle income, you get to the 50 to 200,000 range, and it's between 2.5% and 3%. But in that $18,000 to $35,000 range, it's 3.5%. And so it's actually directly opposite of ability to pay, where the lower income you are, the higher your property tax burden. And so the burden shifting is absolutely true. And it's a values statement. We make decisions based on our values, and the legislature over the years has said that they value reducing taxes like this business equipment tax that we talked about, which really has an exemption now for the first, I think, $1 million of value. And so this is truly large scale business that is paying this tax. This isn't your mom and pop business. This is large scale business that's paying this tax. So it's a value statement to say that we want to shift, and I'm not advocating for shifting a tax burden to business. What I'm advocating for is shifting it to tourists and shifting it to the new forms of our economy. So we've got, and the commissioner can talk much more intelligently about tourism impacts, but we have millions of tourists coming to Western Montana every year, and we're glad to have them, and they provide a lot of value to our local businesses. They eat in our restaurants, they stay in our hotels, they They provide value when they come here. But, when I travel, I don't think about the extra 68 cents I spent on dinner because of a sales tax at a restaurant. That's not a consideration that people make when they decide to come and visit a place. And so, why not tap into this resource of all of these people coming to visit our beautiful state? And, they drive on our roads, they call 911, they go to our parks, and again, we're glad to have them, but why not tap into that as a potential revenue source? So the burden shift is you push on the waterbed and the other side goes up. The burden shift is inevitable. What we need to do is be thoughtful about to whom we're shifting the burden.
Yeah, and what part of the waterbed's going up.
Yeah,
exactly. I want to shift here for a second. We do have Council President Gwen Jones here with us, and also Josh Slotnick, our Missoula County Commissioner. I think we've talked, Josh, a little bit more about the city aspect of it. Let's shift gears, and I'm going to have you stand up here so we can get on our camera here. Which side do you want them on, Ron? Okay, let's do this. All right. We got to get all Hollywood here. So, Commissioner, tell me, when we talk about this, the tax burden that we look at, and from the county's perspective, give me a little insight as to what do you see are some of the inequities when it comes to this system?
Sure. So, first, thanks a lot for having me, and thank you, Jordan, for including me, and thanks, Joel and the folks at the library. Jordan hit on some really key points that I'm just going to say again because they're really important. We should have a tax system that reflects the economy we have. The tax system and the economy they should fit hand in glove. We used to be a rough around the edges mill town with this soft, sweet, little milky core of arts and culture. That's what Missoula was. We still have that arts and culture core, but the rough around the edges mill town is gone. And as Jordan pointed out, we've become a place that's much more oriented around technology and services and tourism. Our economy, our tax system should reflect that. Instead of shifting burden onto residences, we used to have residences, we still have residences. The tax system should reflect what our economy actually is. So when you mention inequities, you're setting me up well here. We have 120,000 residents in the county. According to the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research at the U of M, we had 3.5 million tourists last year. And we start spouting numbers, they can just go flying all over and you don't really comprehend them. So I just want to say those numbers again, because they are really dramatic. Kind of see if you can hold them simultaneously. 120,000 residents, 3.5 million tourists. Average stay for tourists are 5 days. 5 days. There was a time when we were a nice waypoint between Glacier and Yellowstone.
Missoula was known for that. It was like you'd stay over, and that was it once, and then you go.
Well, all the wonderful things that we know of as Missoula are also known by everybody else. And the folks who come don't just come to catch a good night's sleep before driving the next day. They come so they can hit our river access sites, our trailheads, our glorious downtown, experience that culture I mentioned, and just be in this place that really feels a lot better than most other places. I know I'm biased, but it's true. When those folks are here, those 3.5 million people, and they're here for 5 days at a shot, they use the services that Jordan outlined, and they don't pay for them. And this isn't because they're behaving badly, it's just the structure of the situation. What that means is all of us who live under a roof, and I hope everybody who hears this or listens to it is living under a roof, we pay for the cost of providing services to our guests. And it wasn't too big a deal in 1999, but now it's a really big deal, 3.5 million. For the county side, we have more sheriff's deputies on shift at any time than we would if we only had those 120,000. On any given day, let's say a July day, there could be 160,000 people in the county. We have to have an emergency response system that's set up for 160,000, even though only 120,000 are paying for it.
The thing I think is interesting, when you brought that number up and you're talking about the 160 versus the 3.5, I instantly went back to his 96.5%. And I'm not good at math, I'm a journalist, but it seems to me like that's where your inequity really shows up. If 160,000 people are paying that 96%, and you've got this extra burden from 3.5 million, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out.
No, we are literally subsidizing services for our guests. And as Jordan also very eloquently pointed out, we're glad to have them, and they contribute to the economy. But they don't contribute to paying for those services. That burden falls on the shoulders of everybody who lives under a roof, whether you're paying rent or you're paying a mortgage or you own your house outright. All three categories, you're paying for those services for folks who don't pay.
Josh, tell me when we talk about this reform and the legislature, talk a little bit about that relationship, maybe some of your frustrations, aspirations as a Missoula County Commissioner.
Sure, thanks. So we'll do two of these, one on the legislature, and then if you're okay, I kind of pivot to reform. So just this last week, I was at the Montana Association of Counties, also known as MACO, at their midwinter conference. And there was real discussion, very active, vibrant discussion about the legislature's attempts to do tax reform. And unfortunately, they were not looking at new sources of revenue. They were looking at ways they could cut spending on behalf of local government. And the phrase I heard over and over again was, local government spending is out of control. And he said frustration. Yes, I felt a sense of frustration. Because our ability to spend tax money, to generate tax money, our ability to generate tax money is already prescribed. We cannot be out of control. Jordan mentioned the word mill. A mill is a unit of taxation. There's a mill cap. The state legislature says you can levy only these mills unless voters approve more. You hit a cap, you can't go anymore. There is no out of control. There is a tight box, and we have to stay within that box. And in Missoula County, we are not even at our mill cap. We have not maxed out our ability to extract money from the good folks who live here. So to hear the legislature say our spending is out of control is inaccurate and frustrating. And the response on the part of the legislature was to figure out ways to curtail our ability to generate revenue within that box that already exists. So what they were saying was, oh, here's a good idea. When new houses are built, let's just not tax those.
I saw that.
Man, and Jordan pointed this out really well. No one ever asks for fewer services. But if this happens, that's exactly what we will get. Thankfully, and I'm really appreciative, and this gets political in terms of Democrats and Republicans, but not around ideology, but around raw numbers. So political power in our state rests with the Republicans. In this big plenary session I was at MACO, 100 plus county commissioners, most all of them Republican, were infuriated. This isn't a Democrat-Republican thing. There were people standing right next to me. One guy stood up and said, I got one guy in our county who drives a road grader. You cut our revenue, I have to let that guy go. And there was uproar. And, you know, it's tough because as the executive director of MACO pointed out, he said to us all, you guys got to give these folks a win. He met the legislature, said the political wins are super strong, that local government spending is out of control, and you have to let them address that so they can experience a political win. That message did not go over well with my fellow county commissioners, and I'm not talking about the folks at Greenpeace over there in Gallatin County. I'm talking about the rest of the state, because whether you're Missoula County or Gallatin County or Daniels County or Broadwater County, we play by the same rules. There's not one set of rules for the Democrats and another for Republicans. So if the legislature is successful, we will see services curtailed. Now, on a positive note, after that plenary session I'm describing, we had lunch with the governor. I make it sound like I'm chumming with the governor. I'm not. I was in a room with 150 other people having lunch with the governor. I just listened politely. And a Republican county commissioner from Yellowstone County stood up and very respectfully outlined this situation. And the governor said, well, if there's a revenue-cutting bill and MACO's not supportive of it, I won't support it either. And he got a standing ovation, and I would say deservedly so, because he just alleviated a tremendous amount of stress and strain right there, because we cannot cut services.
And that's not what the tax reform that you guys are talking about has nothing to do with that.
I
right?
apologize for that monologue.
No, that's fine.
Much. Reform. Okay. So earlier in the summer, way back when, I went and sought out some other county commissioners who are Republicans and I have good working relationships with. And I sought these folks out because they are kind of like they function as bellwethers politically. If these guys, and they were all men, so if these guys say this is okay, it's going to be okay with a broader audience. And they were very gentlemanly and kind to me and closed the door and had real frank conversations. And I said, okay, here's the situation. We got 3.5 million tourists and our locals are being crushed. Is there a way you can see for us to tax tourists and be okay with it? And I heard some really interesting information. And so what I did was just gathered all this up, shared it with some other people, and now I'll describe to you what that package looked like. So the proposal we came up with, and this proposal is not happening now. So anybody who sees this, do not be
Not
afraid.
active in the legislature.
Not active in the legislature.
Yeah. We've kind of missed that cutoff.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what happened, but it's no need for anybody to get alarmed if you hear about this. It is not happening. But what I heard from these Republican county commissioners in terms of what they could accept, it would look like this. We would tax at 4% things that mostly tourists buy. So these would be hotel beds, Airbnb beds, rental cars, guide fees, restaurants and bars. Now, right away, people go, wait a minute, I go to a restaurant and a bar and I live here. Yes, indeed, there's a crossover. And for every dollar that we generate from taxing tourists, we take that off of property taxes. So a dollar generated, a dollar reduced on your property taxes.
So it really is a dollar for dollar.
Dollar for dollar. And here's one where I can see Dale there, and I'm like, Dale's going to be mad at me. And Dale's like 10 times smarter than me on this kind of stuff, so I don't want Dale mad at me. The reality is we need new revenue. We need new revenue. But the political reality is that is an absolute 100% non-starter. And I was told this by the county commissioners I met with, that they were like, if you want to talk about new revenue, we're done. We can go get a beer, but we're done having this chat about taxes. And I also heard that from some Republican legislators. No new revenue is the only thing they would accept in this. So we could do one-to-one reduction. They would do that. That means we raise $1 million off a tourist tax. We take $1 million off the revenue side of our budget. They were okay with that. Next thing that was really important to them, there's a political reality here that a whole bunch of counties and cities do not benefit from tourism. We need to share the wealth. So the figure we arrived at was 10%. We take 10% of the money we generate from taxing tourists, give it back to the state. The state would then dole that out to counties in central Montana and eastern Montana and cities who don't experience tourism and allow them to access that money for infrastructure projects or for buying down school mills.
How do you set that threshold as to what's a tourist county, what's not?
The county would get to decide for themselves. So if this were to come to pass, we would, as Jordan pointed out really well, we would ask people. We would say, here, you all decide. It's a democracy. You get to vote. So if the folks in Broadwater County were saying, God, we're really getting hit by tourism, people coming out here to go elk hunting, let's do it. And they would vote and put it on. Otherwise, they could say, we don't have enough tourism to really make this work for us. We'll take a pass, but we will apply to the state for some of that money to help with this bridge project. I do want to say this little piece on infrastructure because it's important. The state government and the feds have some really robust grant programs for doing infrastructure. I mean, many millions of dollars to build bridges, roads, et cetera. And we've seen how much these projects cost here in Missoula. In order to qualify for a grant, you have to come up with a match. Often that match is so high, cities and counties don't take advantage of the money. They say, oh, we can't take that $13 million from you, federal government, because we can't come up with the 2 or the 1.5. So the money we were talking about, I'm talking about generating here through taxing tourists, we could make available to like the city of Cut Bank. And this is a quote from Darrell James from the Infrastructure Coalition. And he said, if you're the mayor of Cut Bank, $50,000 is a big deal. Not that it isn't to Jordan, but we work on different scales. So the idea here would be we'd share the wealth. Another thing they said was really important. If in some time in the future there is a statewide sales tax, this needs to go away. That this can't impede further tax reform because there's a whole lot of folks, Republicans and Democrats, that see a need for a sales tax. And you are totally right. We say, no way, in Montana, we don't have a sales tax. 47 states have sales tax. The 3 that don't, we're holding on to that tight. I'm not going to come out in favor of it right now. But if something like that was to happen, this would have to go away.
All you have to do is look at Oregon debate 20 years ago. It was exactly the same kind of argument. Oregon said, we'll never have a sales tax. And all the Washingtonians were going across the bridge in Vancouver and buying cars. And somebody finally said, this system doesn't work.
You're totally correct on that. So we were able to generate a bit of a groundswell of enthusiasm around this proposal. And we're able to raise some money privately and get the involvement of the Montana State Chamber of Commerce, and they included questions on this on a recent statewide poll. And it was a slam dunk success. 65% of Montanans were okay having tourists basically kind of pay for some of the services they pay and not have the burden on us. With education, that means when we explained all the nuts and bolts of the proposal, it went up to 70%. In the world of polling, that is a crushing slam dunk. But we were told by folks at the legislature and in the administration that anything involving taxes was a non-starter. And that's okay. We can be incrementalists about this. At the MACO conference where I just was, at that huge plenary session, the deputy director brought this up, not this proposal, but brought this up as a problem. We are being crushed by tourism. We're subsidizing services for those folks. We need to figure this out. And I thought, oh my God, we succeeded, right? Because I went to the same conference last year. Nobody mentioned that, right? So you talked about over time this becoming a sense of we need to fix this, we need to fix it. I feel like we're adding to that conversation. And we're going to work over the interim. Just before, and I'm almost done here, but just before we kind of put this to bed for a little while, we had a meeting with nearly 30 people on a Zoom call, and there were folks, electeds and staff from cities across Montana and counties across Montana and members of chambers of commerce from across Montana, all in agreement that this is a problem. It's a problem because this is fundamental to our economy, but our tax system doesn't match. We need to fix it.
I'm going to ask you one quick follow-up to just do this, because you talked about the dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
journalist math, I look at that and I say, yeah, but if we have 3.5 million tourists this year, 2 years from now, it's now 4 million, or whatever the number is.
It gets better.
It gets better, right? Doesn't it? Doesn't it? So that ratio changes in our favor, right?
As long as the current arc of tourism continues, it gets better. The more tourists we get, the more tourism dollars spent here that we could tax, the greater reduction on your property taxes. And we would have to ride that wave. Imagine we have a horrific fire season and we got 4 months of smoke. We don't have a lot of tourists. We would account for that. But therein lies some fairness. If you use services, you're paying for them. If you're not coming to Montana, you don't pay for the service.
Interesting. Commissioner, thank you, so,
thank
much.
you so much.
We might get you back up here. I'm going to have Gwen come up here and put a little more onto this too. And Gwen, in your time on council, especially, I know that we've had our share of frustration because the gas tax, as Jordan mentioned, was one. But I've seen a lot of debate back and forth for many years over the resort tax or a lodging tax, those kinds of things. From the council's perspective, how frustrating is it to come up with these innovative ideas, have people like the idea, and then it just goes nowhere and runs into a roadblock from Helen?
You want me to? Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's very frustrating, and our budget sessions in the summertime are very hard as we're trying to make the budget work when we know how much need is out there, and frankly, just providing essential services and closing that gap so that we can provide those services, but not raise taxes as much as we want to be as careful as possible with those dollars. And I've been on council this is my 8th year. I've seen it go up exponentially. And after about my second year on council, I said, boy, summer has turned from my favorite season into my most stressful season. And I educated myself a lot on the structural nature of property taxes, how they work. And honestly, as I did my research, I found a bunch of articles from the 1990s and 2000s where economists were saying, hey, Montana, you're on an unsustainable trajectory here. You better figure it out. And it really happened, I think, like 2010, 2015 on, we're really starting to feel that pressure. Took a while to build up, but now we're really feeling it. So yeah, it is a huge challenge every summer.
When we look at this too, I think the average person may look at that and say, well, gosh, they're building homes all over my neighborhood, or now I'm having to, so the pot of money must be getting bigger, but it doesn't really work that way, does it?
No, a growing city has a lot of infrastructure needs. The services that we provide, those are very expensive, police and fire, and to meet the demand and to be adequately providing those essential services is expensive. We need to tip up another fire station because, as we all know, we are growing out to the airport. And in order to meet our response time, we can't drive across town to service someone out there. Tipping up another fire station is very expensive, and then you have to staff it 24/7. So right there, you have a sense of how expensive it is. I know that Great Falls has not tipped up a new fire station since 1971, and they have a slower rate of growth than us. They tend to be a little bit more static, but they need to, and they went down a stair step in their ISO rating this last year, which if your fire folks are not getting there in a timely manner, all of that data is gathered, and the homeowners insurance people look at that, because they want to be matching up all of those statistics. And if your fire people aren't getting there quick enough, they're going to charge more for their homeowners insurance. So that's an example right there of how it impacts everyone with our essential services.
As you look at this, and I asked Mayor Hess this, we talked about that, if you change this ratio, if you do something with adjusting property tax, so maybe now businesses would be, picking up more than that 5% like he talked about. Do you have any concerns about how does that affect investment, that private sector investment in the community, the jobs that would be provided, those kinds of things? Because somebody could look at that and say, well, gosh, we're going to scare away all the business.
Well, I think that's been the philosophy and the approach for the last several decades is, for anyone growing up in Montana, it is a hard place to make a living. There is way more money here now than when I was growing up. I begged for a sub-minimum wage job in high school. I don't even know how they legally could do that, to be honest. So there has been several decades of how do we grow business. So I understand why the legislature has taken the tack of, like, if we cut back on business equipment, that's going to help grow business because there's going to be less expenses there. But not understanding that the need for the revenue still exists. Fire and police still cost, and now we're shifting the burden. So I think it needs a holistic look. That's what I come back to. And there are people that are smarter than me with PhDs in economics and taxation who can look at our economy and come up with ideas on, here's the money, here's how we can spread it out evenly, here's how we can make it sustainable for property, for residential taxes, and also make it equitable and work well for commercial properties, for people who want to come in and invest and start a business.
You could almost make the observation, too, with the work at home, with all of the remote workers who are now moving here. In effect, they are their own business, right? So if property tax is chasing them out from moving from wherever, even across state, then you're having some impact there as well, right?
And I think there's frankly, some federal taxation issues that we need to look at post-pandemic, because you look at how many remote workers are here now, and guess where they're paying the majority of their income tax to? Wherever the headquarters are. And that was pre-pandemic. The world has changed. And so I'm just saying, I think tax policy is very complicated. It has huge ramifications. It needs to be very thoughtful. But if we don't address our property taxes, which are on an unsustainable trajectory, I've heard people from Helena say this from the Department of Revenue, we are running the risk of something like a Proposition 13, which happened in California 40 years ago when they were having escalating property values and their property taxes were going up. And Proposition 13, which was a very blunt tool and capped property taxes, gutted their public school system, gutted the University of California system and their state college, their state university system, huge impacts on their infrastructure for decades.
You're still seeing impacts from Prop 13. All you got to do is pull back the layers in California. You could see what happened.
And there was something similar to that was broached in Montana 12, 18 months ago. And I sit on the League of Cities and Towns. I sit on the board. That's the entity that for all cities and towns in Montana, they can tap into that as a resource for information, for advocacy. There was a huge concerted effort across Montana to shut that down, because we don't want a Prop 13 here. But the longer we go without thoughtful tax reform, the closer we come to that edge. And that, frankly, I'm glad my kids are out of school, because my husband's aunt, who taught in Southern California in high school, average of 45 students per class. So
that's a day's work right there.
Well, that's not good education. So there's big ramifications.
Gwen, thank you so much for the information. We'll go ahead and we'll throw additional questions as needed. This is a great topic, and I've been kind of neglecting our audience here. I'm sorry, but this is a detailed thing, and it's nice to have all three of these people here to sort of answer. Want to check in with you, Jordan. Any other thoughts here, and then maybe we'll open up for a few questions.
Well, the other issue with the other issue that the legislature has created and continue to create is this notion of an unfunded mandate. So thou shalt do this thing as a city or a county, but there's no money to to support it. So there have been a bunch of those over the years. A great example is in 2017, the legislature decimated. I mean, they completely dismantled our mental health case management system. And what that did was it put mental health in the hands of local government. I mean, and we're not equipped for it. We're not staffed for it. That's not one of our core competencies. And because the state cut case management, we saw an increase in law enforcement calls. We saw an increase. We had to spin up a whole new program, our mobile support team, which is a great program. And it provides this really great service for people in crisis. But we had to spin that program up because the state cut mental health care. And so it created all these unfunded mandates for us. Another example, and this is a good example, but the state has really strict laws on nutrient loading in the river. So what comes out of the wastewater plant has to, there's increasing standards of how clean that needs to be. But we're looking at, to fully comply with what's on the books now. And there's some work through the League of Cities and Towns, and there's a lot of work going on around resolving this issue. But we're looking at tens of millions of dollars, maybe $50 million or more, to make our wastewater treatment plant up to that standard. There's no money associated with implementing that. But again, it's just it's something that we're told to do that we don't have the ability to fund with the current system. There are dozens of unfunded mandates in the legislature this year. Some good, some bad. There's bills revising our pension funding. There's bills revising how people connect to public water supplies. There's bills revising subdivision and land use review processes that impose requirements at the state or on the local level and don't provide any money to fund them. So if that is not the state creating a problem that the local government has to solve, I don't know what is. I mean, it's a complete disconnect to say that the state didn't create this problem. The state 100% created this problem, and it is going to be incumbent on the state to fix it. And we are all, as local governments around the state, we are willing participants. We are eager participants. We are as Josh, as he mentioned, went through so many iterations of the proposal that he developed in order to get buy-in in a bipartisan manner around the state. Urban counties, rural counties, red counties, blue counties. And that's what this is going to take. And as local government, we stand ready and willing to help, and we stand ready and willing to innovate.
It seems to me like, too, you do have, because you mentioned the water quality issues and those things, and some of that is coming down from the federal level, too. So I would think that if you can't have local government, state government on the same page there, then you're getting into another whole layer of mandates and costs that are coming down at a federal level, and stormwater is the one that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
We haven't even begun to deal with stormwater in Montana to the extent that we've seen in other states.
Yeah, and stormwater is a great example of another unfunded mandate where we were required by federal regulations that are implemented by the state, by DEQ. We were required to create a stormwater utility. So that's a new tax on our local, it's a new tax that Missoulians pay. It's a good thing. I mean, it's a good service. It protects our aquifer. There's a great interpretive exhibit about stormwater in the library downstairs, and that's actually funded in part through the stormwater utility because a big part of that is education. But we're required to do it. We didn't get any money to do it, and so that's another case of the state, making us do something and not providing us the resources to handle it.
All right, good. I've totally lost track of time. I'm so into this because it's so detailed and it's a crunchy topic. That's what I like to say. It's very crunchy. There's a lot to deal with, a lot to unpack. Let's open it up. We've got our audience here. We've got our students who are always great for questions. They come by. Anything else? I knew Susan would probably have a question. Susan, go ahead and stand up, if you will. And if you don't feel comfortable asking a question, you want to write it down, we have some note cards available. Susan, turn this way because I'm going to get you on. Come this way.
Okay.
Okay. So let's have your question.
Well, I have a comment, first of all. I'm a taxpayer. I don't know what the percentage of residents are that are actually property tax owners, because most people can't afford to buy property at this point. And there are probably a lot of people that are in this room that can't afford to buy property. And more they can't afford to rent property. And as a general rule, I would like to say to the elected officials here, I support any funding for law and order. I support road construction and maintenance of road. But I am categorically opposed to adding any more parks. I am also opposed to expanding and doing funding for homeless shelters. And as a property owner, I have adamantly opposed that. And it's not that I don't do work for people that are in need. I do. I personally, out of my own pocket, help people. But I think at some point the voters said no, and I was shocked. I didn't expect Missoula to say no to 2 bond issues this year. They never say no. And I think we are at a limit because renters and property owners can't afford the things that are getting piled on us. I brought the printout of what I've been paying in taxes. My taxes have gone up thousands of dollars in the last few years. So to you, I would like to ask, when are you going to stop adding projects that are going to cost money? And when are you going to stop proposing the narrowing of roads like the Higgins Bridge and all the other roads so that people can bicycle and walk when it's 2 below zero?
Sure. Yeah. Josh, go ahead and stand up here so we can get you on camera.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Same place here.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks, Susan, for coming and for asking those questions. I appreciate it. And there's some things you said in there I really want to highlight because you're totally right on there when you mentioned renters. And it kind of echoes what I tried to say at the beginning when I coded it a little bit. If you're living under a roof, you pay property taxes. If you own a house, for sure, you get a bill. But if you are a renter, the property taxes on that space you're renting are embedded in your rent. So every single person who is living under a roof is paying property taxes. So you said, when are we going to stop doing new projects? Well, I believe part of our role in county government is to help solve problems. And there are very real problems that people bring to us and problems that we recognize. Not attempting to solve them does not make them go away. The only way we're going to make any headway on anything from a buzzword like homelessness or dealing with wastewater in Lolo or the fact that we need more SROs in our schools, the only way we address those problems is through money. We can't wish them away. We can't say, oh, would somebody volunteer to be an SRO? Maybe we can get some folks to with shovels to come dig up the Lolo wastewater plant. No, we can't do those things. It costs money. Now we could say, well, we won't repair the wastewater system in Lolo. Or we wouldn't have more SROs. Or we wouldn't deal with our homeless folks.
But I think to clarify, what I heard Susan saying though was more of the amenities, not so much infrastructure. And I hear this complaint a lot too. People say, gosh, how many people are actually using XYZ Park, whatever it is, or how many are this? I never go to the library. I mean, that is an argument out there. I think driven by the frustration over property taxes, no matter where the money actually goes.
Yeah, I know you're right. That is an argument. It's not one I put a tremendous stock into. There are a whole bunch of roads in Missoula County that I've not driven on. But I appreciate that other people can drive on them because we share an economy. And for the economy to work, everybody needs to drive on the road they need to drive on. So goods and services and people can move about. It isn't just about me. If it was just about me, we wouldn't have an economy. An economy is how we interact through sales and commerce. It's not just me and my road. And somebody could say, I don't like that library. Well, you don't have to go to the library. But the fact is, this library brings people here and adds to the quality of life. And people choose to live in Missoula not because they get a job at one of those mills. They're all gone. They choose to come here because this place is so wonderful. And this library adds to the wonderfulness, as do some of our parks. Now, for sure, we can reach a limit. And I kind of think we're there in terms of amenities. I kind of think we're amenitied up. Right now, I'd like to see us spend more on equity, more time and energy. How do we bring the folks up on the bottom? I think the amenities are taken care of for a while. And we also need to continue to invest in the future, because in the future, we'll have more people. We won't be able to rest on our laurels of amenity generation in 2023. We may need a bigger library then. We may need another park or another place for people to hike. So we have to address issues right now, and we also have to make investments in the future, which may seem a little excessive right now, but hopefully don't if you think out a little bit.
Great.
I think one area where I would welcome, and we've interacted at public meetings over the years, and I've appreciated that. And I think that one of the things that that I like about local government is that we can sit in a room and have a conversation, and we may disagree, and at the end of the day, we all are working in good faith because we care about our community. When someone in Helena from Culbertson or Ingomar or Galata or Malta are making decisions about what we can and can't do in Missoula, that takes our ability to chart our destiny away from us as Missoulians. So one of the things that I think we ought to ask the state to allow us to do is to have those community conversations. And I think, the library, that we keep talking about it because we're in the building in it, but it's a great example because it is something that, it was a voter approved initiative. And that I think we should be allowed to have these conversations about other things. Not should we do this thing with property taxes, but should we be able to tax tourists? Should we be able to do this, to explore this other revenue source? And I completely agree. I mean, I am 100% on board that property taxes are too high. Full stop. I completely agree with that. I disagree on the reason for why that is.
I'm not objecting to property taxes. I'm objecting to projects that are on my property taxes that aren't necessarily.
I want to throw something in here, though, and I recall back in it's been about 10 years ago. I think it was about 2013. And I can remember having a conversation with Mayor Ingham because at that point, Splash Montana was just hitting capacity big time. And I remember talking to him about that. And at that point, this is before school bond issues, library bond issues, and all those things. And I said, at what point do you look at opening another Splash Montana or a similar facility for someone on the west side of town or somewhere else so that they can have access? And he clearly said at that point in time, he said, we just can't afford it. So I think what I hear you saying, Mayor, is that, and certainly Josh said this, that we are at sort of a different point than we were even 5-6 years ago because of things that have been approved, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, we're going to be facing a very difficult budget season this year. And that's because of, Gwen mentioned these structural problems. We have a structural deficit where we have the system that we have to bring in revenue doesn't allow us to fund the services at the level of service that the public expects. And, so contrast that, and this is around the state. This is small towns, this is big cities, this is, big in Montana city term. Like this is everyone throughout all of the local governments. This is the small counties, it's the large counties, it's the county with the one guy that drives the road grader. We're all facing the same problem. The state is sitting on a $2.5 billion surplus, and that is actually a real direct connection to the economic prosperity that we're seeing right now. We're seeing wages increase. We're seeing people bring high-wage jobs here. We're seeing there is a greater amount of wealth in this state than there has ever been, and it is systematically, it is structurally not benefiting local governments. The services that local governments rely on, think of a service. Think of a service that the city provides that you value. I can think of a dozen or more. And I can think of a ton of them just immediately. Think of a service now that the state government provides that you directly benefit from. And state governments, it's important, and federal government's important, but where the rubber meets the road in terms of providing services to the public is at the local level. So providing streets to drive on, providing parks services, providing 911 services. When you call 911 on the worst day of your life, someone shows up in a timely manner. These are services that are provided at the local level, and the prosperity that we've seen in our state does not allow us to provide the level of service that people expect.
Let's go ahead. Any other questions from the audience? Anything coming in from cards or anything? Okay, let's go ahead and I'm going to just have you stand there and turn this way. And give me your name.
Carl, I do innovative thinking of this local community. And this downtown area could be in a bastion of transition. We got all this wonderful green space, walking areas, and do-gooders, interactiveness. You need to build the appropriate facilities for them to live next to it, that when they do their work in-house or with the electronic age, they can get out and enjoy the local river frontage or trails and so forth. The downtown area needs to develop into the 21st century. It's in the 19th century, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Carl. I brought this up, and I was wondering if Carl would ask this question, because it does beg a question. We talk about being innovative with tax structure and making those changes. So kind of a two-part question for you, Mayor. Number one, should we be looking at things in a radically different fashion? You bring up, it's been a conversation here, the roads. You know, we always look at the roads. We look at fire service. We look at police service. And should we be looking at, you know, a 2023 solution to that, like redevelopment of the core as opposed to spreading out? But then the second part of the question is also, can we do that kind of innovation with the present tax structure?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that we can do and that we're doing really well within our structure is we're encouraging development in ways that strengthen our tax base. So we're doing that through the use of urban renewal districts, where we're directly investing in growing our tax base. And so that's one way that we can create wealth in our community that directly increases the taxable value of properties within the community. So that's a tool that we can use that is an investment in the future of our community. Another thing that we can do is through our land use policies, we can really encourage development in a way that supports itself. So a large lot subdivision on the far end of town, you know, by the airport, is going to have a net drain on the property taxes coming into that are not going to provide enough money to sustain the roads and provide the services over time. That's just a function of the size of the lot and the distance from the core. And so when we can provide, if you were to look at a heat map of tax value in the community, the downtown area would be where it's at. That's where the concentration of tax value is. So to the extent that we can provide mixed-use redevelopment opportunities, these are ways that we can increase the efficiency of providing services. And so really it's going back to a traditional neighborhood development. It's looking at how areas like, you know, our most beloved historic neighborhoods, how did the University District develop? How did our downtown develop? And emulating those patterns, that's one of the best things we can do from a land use standpoint to encourage a better property tax to service balance.
That's why I asked that, though, because, you know, even as we see more building at the edges, you know, different projects because of all this, we've got to have affordable housing, and that seems to be fueling a lot of that right now. But most of those are in areas that are going to need new roads or need new services or need those things. So I guess that's kind of a... So the second part of the question, though, is can you do that type of innovation, whether it's land use, whether it's, you know, development incentives, if you're under the present property tax structure?
I mean, we're constrained. We are constrained by our ability to deliver the services that that our community expects, and that is going to only become more acute. We will be constrained in our ability to provide police and fire services. We will be constrained in our ability to maintain roads. We will be constrained in our ability to do all of these basic, you know, bread and butter services if this system doesn't change. And so innovating can be expensive. It can be, I mean, it can save money, but you know, innovative solutions are going to cost money. And Pat Williams once said something to me that it's always stuck with me. That was that efficiency is the word that people who don't like government use to make it smaller. We're pretty damn efficient. I mean, we provide an incredible value and an incredible level of service, and we do it in a really efficient, lean manner. And I think that's something that we need to be talking more and more about, is the level of service that we provide for the dollar input. And that's just something that I think we're going to be at a breaking point if we don't have those those property tax reforms.
I'm looking at my, come back here. Gwen's got a comment, but I'm looking at my students. You have anything you want to ask? Because you always have such great, innovative questions. Anything? Yeah, go ahead and stand up here. Because this is our rising generation, and I'm sure they have a question. Okay.
I had a couple questions. The first one was, what are the steps that you envision taking to implement such a proposal, the tourist tax, and how after that, how long would you anticipate it would take to get that on the ballot, and then from there to actually implement it? And then my second question was, I guess I got the impression that it seemed like you're suffering from a lack of revenue, and how would that work if the tourist tax were implemented, and you say that's $1 cut from property tax for every dollar that for every dollar the tourist tax brings in? How does that work with generating more revenue?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the first thing, the proposal. I'll maybe answer the second question first. And so the proposal doesn't actually create new revenue, and that is a long-term problem for us. We do have, we do need to build a 6th fire station. We do need to expand services as our community grows. So in the long run, we absolutely do need new revenue. This is sort of a more short-term, more palatable option that just allows us to diversify our revenue. And so I think what it does that's beneficial is it provides property tax replacement for property tax relief for people who are really burdened with high property taxes. So the bill printout of what property taxes have been over time, it provides benefits. It provides a benefit to everyone in that category. It could have downward pressure on rent also, because it would be lowering the property tax burden of landlords, and so it could really have a positive benefit, even though it didn't create new revenue. It could have a real positive benefit by alleviating that property tax burden. I think how fast something like this could be implemented would kind of depend on the ultimate nature of the proposal. Usually bills at the legislature are effective they're effective usually in October the same year. So best case scenario, if the legislature passed something now and it got on the ballot in October, it could maybe, it became effective in October. Maybe the county could decide to get it on the ballot next year, and then maybe it'd be another year to implement. So no matter what it is, it's going to be a minimum of 3 to 5 years. But I think more realistically what we're looking at is building over the next couple of years this awareness and building coalitions so that at the 2025 legislature we can get some real traction, and then maybe move forward from there. I think that would be the realistic best case scenario. Yeah.
Ben, did you have a clarification point or a question?
Well, I was just going to ask Jordan a question and have him talk a little bit about the fact that I think because we are local electeds and we talk to our local people here, it's perceived as a Missoula problem, but I think tax reform is truly a Montana issue. It's not a Missoula issue. And as I said, I sit on the League of Board of Cities and Towns, on the board of the League of Cities and Towns, and tax reform is a high priority for that organization. So I was wondering if Jordan, there were some great charts that were given out, and I wonder if you could talk about where Missoula is in the property tax landscape across Montana, and the use of a per capita analysis, which is really an apples to apples, because I can tell you people are like, well, the mills in Billings are lower than in Missoula. Well, that's because the property value is lower in Billings. And so first of all, it's having the right analysis, but then if you could speak to where Missoula is in the Montana landscape of property taxes.
Absolutely. So there's several metrics, and it's a really good question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. Thank you, Gwen. I was looking at my chart and I said we didn't even do that comparison.
Yeah, and there's copies of these, and we'll make sure they're linked on the website as well. The revenue per capita. This is our property tax generation per person. We're in the middle of the pack. So we're $709 per capita in Missoula. We're down. We're in the middle of the pack. So Billings is higher. Great Falls is lower. Bozeman is higher. Great Falls is lower. Interestingly to me, Kalispell is higher. They're bringing in more money per person than Missoula, and Kalispell certainly isn't a politically liberal place relative to Missoula. So this goes to show that it transcends these political labels, where it transcends party politics, where the residents of Kalispell pay more per person than the residents of Missoula do for property taxes and assessments.
Is that based on any different in assessment schedules, though?
No, it's not. So we're all on a twice a year schedule, November and May. So it's and you look at every metric. You look at debt per capita. We're in the middle of the pack. You look at our total assessments and taxes. We're in the middle of the pack. We're behind Kalispell and Billings. We're actually in a real we're very status quo as far as we're very average.
Not at either edge,
yeah.
in other words.
And every metric that you look at mill values, you look at mill values per capita, you look at revenue per capita. All of these they paint the same story, where we're not an outlier. We're not this place that spends more than other places. We're not. That's just not the reality in Missoula.
I want to ask you one thing that crossed my mind here a little while ago. Because we were talking about, a lot of the discussion tonight has been about having options, about having local governments to have options to go to voters. And I want to ask this question because over the years, not only in this state but others, I see school districts who were given that power, right? They're given that ability to pass levies, to pass bond issues. And it's a system that very much is based upon, property taxes. It's based upon the political makeup of those those jurisdictions, those kinds of things. And it could be a real feast or famine. So one of the questions I had, if we're given those tools, whatever they may be, is there any fear that we might create a situation where, oh boy, in 2024 or 25, everybody was in favor of this. Taxes go up. The Susan Renaults of this world say, I was in favor of this, but now I'm tapped out. And now all of a sudden we go into a famine period, where now that mechanism doesn't work. Any fears of having that, of kind of replicating the challenges we've seen school districts have with those kinds of options?
Well, I think any reform has to be thoughtful, and we have to think about what the potential unintended consequences are. I mean, states that had sales tax, their revenue was decimated in the early phase of the pandemic, just totally obliterated. No one could have predicted that was something that was going to happen.
And their gas taxes. You look at Washington, Oregon. I mean, they depend so much on their gas tax, which is like 2 or 3 times what ours is. Nobody was driving to work all of a sudden, and you lost revenue there too.
What we can say is that decisions that were made a couple decades ago about our tax structure are not serving us well now. And that is, there will be problems with any system, but the system that we have now is fundamentally broken. And that's the starting point.
Yeah, good. Well, I appreciate your comments, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioner Slotnick. Thanks. Well, we're running out of time here, Carl, so we'll have some conversations after we break here. And Gwen, thank you so much, Gwen Jones, City Council President, for being here to answer these questions. This is, I want to say, not the end of this dialogue. I think, as Josh put so well, anytime you're trying to resolve something as fluid as taxes, especially property taxes, it gets to be a really interesting conversation. But I appreciate all of you. Thank you for your questions too, because it really does illustrate we've got a lot of work to do to make this happen. Hopefully, Susan, you and I can pay our property taxes in the interim while they all work it out. But I think that's where public involvement is important too, right?
Absolutely. And I think we can all agree there's a problem. There's a problem, but it's a structural problem. I think that we've been talking about this problem in a way that I think hasn't been all that productive in the past. So let's start talking about it in a new way.
Reminds me of somebody being stuck in this snow right now, and you get 5 guys that get out of the car and 3 guys stop, and everybody's got a different opinion of how you dig out, right? But you got to get out of the snowbank. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thanks to the Missoula Public Library for hosting us. We always appreciate that. Thanks to Joel Baird and the crew from MCAT for making this available. And again, this will be streamed live, and it'll be available. And we encourage people to watch it, share it too, share it with others, and hopefully we can all work on some solutions here as we go. Thanks for joining us tonight for Wednesdays with the Mayor.